The studio lights burned bright, illuminating every inch of the iconic set of The View. It was supposed to be just another Hot Topic episode, but the atmosphere hinted otherwise. The producers called it a national dialogue on faith and freedom. But, in reality, it was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Cameras rolled. The audience clapped. The hosts settled into their seats. At the end of the curved table sat Anna Kasparian, bold, sharp, and ready to stir controversy. Opposite her, in a crisp white blazer and composed expression, sat Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in U.S. history, and the first openly devout Christian to hold the post in decades. Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward. "Today's discussion is not about politics," she said with a forced smile. "It's about understanding where we stand as a nation." But the tone was anything but peaceful. Midway through the segment, the conversation veered into abortion rights. The room shifted. Energy tightened. The moment came when Anna, eyes flashing with disdain, turned to Karoline and said, "Biblical views on abortion are a clown show. This isn't 1700. I don't care what the Bible says. I care about women dying." The crowd gasped. Even the co-hosts looked momentarily stunned. But Whoopi jumped in, nodding her head. "She's right. This is about mercy and healthcare, not dusty old scriptures." All eyes turned to Karoline. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply placed her hands together, breathed in, and spoke. "I'm not here to force beliefs," she began calmly, "but I am here to defend the millions of Americans who wake up every day guided by their faith. You may call it a clown show, Anna, but it's the foundation of this country's moral fabric. I've seen churches stripped of funding, hospitals run by Christian charities denied federal grants, and now we're sitting here mocking their convictions on national television." Silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from confusion. It was the kind that falls when something deep has been struck, something real. Anna tried to interrupt, but Karoline continued. "You can disagree. You have every right. That's freedom. But when you mock faith in front of millions, you don't just offend opinions. You disrespect a people's identity." Twitter lit up before the segment even ended. The hashtag #FaithUnderFire began trending within minutes. Clips of Karoline's speech spread across platforms like wildfire. Conservative networks praised her. Progressive blogs mocked her. But the story wasn't dying. It was multiplying. Backstage, the show's producers looked worried. They hadn't expected this calm. Counterpunch. The ratings were already breaking records, but the vibe wasn't what they had hoped. Karoline wasn't the villain they'd imagined. She was composed, sharp, convincing. What the audience didn't see was the folder in her dressing room. Locked. Hidden, stamped with a seal from a now-dissolved Federal Commission on Religious Liberty. Inside, confidential memos, emails, and media correspondence. Proof of collaboration between certain federal agencies and media groups to label Christian voices as extremist in internal policy drafts. Karoline had spent nights debating whether to bring it into the public eye. Leaking it would be risky. It could tear apart key media alliances and possibly trigger investigations into White House departments, even ones she wasn't connected to. But after Anna's remark, something in her had shifted. The show went to a commercial break. The audience buzzed. A few attendees were already whispering about Karoline's words. Even a producer's assistant was caught re-watching the segment, on their phone, nodding quietly. In the green room, Karoline sat alone, sipping water. She pulled out her phone and saw a message from a private contact. "They fired 3 hospital chaplains last week. No coverage. Are you going to use the file?" She stared at the message. No reply. Her advisor texted moments later. "You broke the algorithm. Stay safe." Outside the studio, protesters were already gathering. Some held signs defending religious liberty. Others called for Karoline's resignation. The nation was dividing faster than anyone expected. Karoline stood by the window, watching the chaos build. She turned slowly, picked up the locked folder, and placed it back in her bag. Not yet, she thought. This was just the beginning. The streets outside the studio buzzed with reporters, activists, and curious onlookers. Police had set up barricades. Protesters on both sides shouted slogans, some praising Karoline Leavitt as a voice of truth, others calling her a dangerous ideologue. Inside, the energy was no calmer. Producers of The View were in panic mode. They hadn't expected the conversation to spiral into national controversy. Executive emails were flying back and forth. Legal advisors warned about potential backlash. Some staff members even questioned whether airing the full episode would escalate things further. But the damage, or impact, depending on who you asked, was already done. Karoline sat quietly in the back hallway, away from the noise. Her phone buzzed non-stop with interview requests, political reactions, and private threats. One message, however, stood out from the rest. They've initiated internal reviews. The agency leak might already be exposed. You need to move. It was from someone inside the Office of Digital Strategy, a former colleague who knew about the sealed documents in Karoline's possession. The folder contained evidence of systemic efforts to censor faith-based content on major platforms, efforts allegedly carried out in quiet coordination with certain government figures. Karoline looked at her bag. The folder was still there, untouched. She hadn't revealed it on air. Not yet. But after the episode, something had shifted. People were listening. Back at the White House, press aides scrambled to prepare statements. The president's inner circle was split. Some wanted to distance the administration from Karoline's stance. Others saw her as a rising force who could galvanize the base before the upcoming elections. Then came the unexpected. The Prime Minister of Hungary posted a clip of Karoline's remarks, praising her courage. Soon after, conservative leaders in Italy and Brazil did the same. International media began picking up the story, not just as a U.S. cultural debate, but as a signal of deeper Western divides over religion, freedom, and state power. Karoline returned to Washington by evening. As she stepped into her apartment, security detail in tow, she saw a letter slipped under her door. It had no return address. Inside, a single sentence, handwritten on White House stationery. Faith is only dangerous when truth gets too close. Her heart slowed. She read it again. Karoline knew what it meant. The documents she carried, emails, between federal regulators and tech CEOs, contained clear proof that certain Christian voices were deliberately flagged as problematic content in government-funded AI moderation guidelines. Some were even blacklisted silently, without due process. She poured herself coffee and turned on the television. Every network was talking about her. A Fox News anchor praised her calm under fire. CNN questioned whether her rhetoric invited extremism. MSNBC featured a roundtable on whether government employees should express personal faith so openly. But something else caught her eye. A scheduled live interview. Tomorrow morning. National syndication. The moderator, Zain Abbasi, an independent journalist known for grilling politicians without mercy. He had invited Karoline, and she had agreed before the episode of The View even aired. Now, with the folder in her possession and the world watching, the stakes were 10 times higher. Karoline's phone buzzed again. This time it was from her legal advisor. Zain won't go easy. He's rumored to have internal DHS documents too. Don't walk into this unless you're ready to go all in. She looked at the folder again. All in. That meant risking her job, her safety, maybe even her future. But what was the alternative? Let powerful networks silence millions of voices in the name of moderation. Pretend she didn't know the truth? She took a deep breath. Tomorrow's interview wasn't just another media event, it was war. And Karoline Leavitt had no intention of backing down. The morning air in Washington, D.C. was sharp and heavy with anticipation. Cameras, satellite trucks, and early-rising producers surrounded the studio building where Karoline Leavitt was scheduled to appear live with journalist Zain Abbasi. She arrived in a black SUV just after 6 a.m., flanked by 2 security officers. Dressed in a steel gray suit, her face calm but unreadable, she carried only a slim briefcase in her hand, the folder still hidden inside. Inside the building, the studio buzzed with tension. Zain was known for his unrelenting interview style. He was respected across political lines for a reason. He didn't play favorites, and he'd been waiting for this interview. Karoline waited, quietly in the green room. A staff assistant offered her coffee. She declined. Her eyes scanned a silent TV showing a live countdown. Interview begins in 9 minutes. She glanced at her phone again. Another message. Watch your words. Intelligence Committee is watching this broadcast. So is Brussels. That wasn't paranoia. Since her View appearance, European media and intelligence agencies had begun investigating allegations of US-led digital suppression. Some EU leaders were demanding public disclosures. Meanwhile, back in D.C., a senior tech executive had quietly resigned. The pressure was real, and Karoline was at the center. 5 minutes before air, she opened her briefcase. The folder marked ClearPath, Internal Protocol D7, stared back at her. She had memorized most of the documents already. The content included direct communications from a government sub-office coordinating with social media platforms to automatically downgrade or throttle posts tagged as faith-based, anti-abortion, or pro-traditional family, if flagged by an AI tool trained under bias. She snapped the case shut. Enough thinking. Time to act. The stage was minimal, a dark blue background, sharp lights, and 2 chairs. Zain Abbasi walked in first, shaking her hand as the director counted down silently. Karoline Leavitt. Zain began. The youngest White House press secretary in U.S. history, and this week, perhaps the most polarizing name in America. Thank you for being here. She gave a nod. I'm here because silence isn't neutral anymore. Zain leaned forward. Let's begin with the View. Did you expect the firestorm? No, she said honestly. But I'm not surprised. The people who control the conversation don't like it when someone speaks from conviction, especially when that conviction comes from faith. Zain raised an eyebrow. Some would say your words were inflammatory. Anna Kasparian called you a religious propagandist. Karoline smiled slightly. When someone mocks scripture and calls faith a clown show on national TV, that's not commentary. That's targeting millions of Americans who believe in something higher than politics. I responded with truth. Zain pressed on. But what about the deeper accusation that your office, or you personally, are involved in what some call faith-driven policy manipulation? She paused. It was time. Karoline reached into her briefcase and slowly pulled out the folder. She held it up for the cameras. What I have here are internal documents. Not from a private company, but from our own federal agencies. Memos, emails, coordination protocols. These show a deliberate pattern of suppressing content online. Content created by people of faith, flagged not for violence or hate, but simply for expressing beliefs on life, gender, and family. The studio fell silent. Zain's eyes narrowed. Are you saying the government is colluding with tech companies to suppress religious speech? I'm not saying it, she replied. I'm showing it. She slid the folder across the table toward him. Pages 2 through 11 include time-stamped emails. One from an executive at a major platform who says, quote, "We've followed the D7 directive to downrank faith-based narratives flagged under cultural destabilization." That's their phrase, not mine. Zain scanned the first page. His face changed. And you're releasing this now? Yes, on your show. Because this isn't about me or even about what happened on The View. This is about the truth that millions of Americans are not imagining it when their voices seem quieter online, when their beliefs are treated as threats. A firestorm was beginning again. But this time, it wasn't cultural. It was institutional. Backstage, producers scrambled. One whispered urgently into her headset, "Karoline, we're getting urgent calls. DHS is asking if these documents are real." Zayn looked into the camera. "We've just been handed what could be the biggest digital free speech leak in recent American history. If verified, these documents suggest religious discrimination built into national tech guidance." Karoline sat back. This wasn't just a moment. It was a shift. And everyone watching knew. It was only the beginning. The interview with Zayn Abbasi went viral within the first 10 minutes of airing. By the time Karoline stepped out of the studio, she had already trended in 38 states. The clip of her sliding the folder across the table played on loop across news outlets, Twitter, and Telegram groups. Some called her a hero. Others called her reckless. But no one was silent. The White House issued a brief statement that same afternoon. Ms. Leavitt's opinions are her own and do not reflect official administration policy. That only fueled the fire. The public wasn't asking if the documents reflected policy. They were asking if they were real. Across the ocean, the European Parliament announced an emergency session. France and Germany demanded clarification from U.S. intelligence services. One EU commissioner used the term digital authoritarianism disguised as secular policy. Karoline had touched a geopolitical nerve. In D.C., however, the mood turned darker. By late evening, Karoline was summoned to a closed-door meeting in a secure basement chamber beneath the Capitol. The room was empty except for a small round table, 3 chairs, and a dim spotlight. 2 figures were already seated when she arrived. Congresswoman Marla Reyes, chair of the Intelligence Oversight Committee, and NSA Deputy Director Ben Kessler. Kessler didn't shake hands. He spoke first. "Do you know what you've done?" Karoline kept her voice steady. "I exposed unconstitutional discrimination." Reyes leaned forward, her voice low and sharp. "You blindsided us. This could break international agreements, compromise domestic surveillance channels, and ignite religious conflict in digital spaces." Karoline didn't blink. "Then maybe it's time people know what's being done in their name." Kessler opened a file of his own. It was a counterintelligence briefing. He slid a photo across the table. An encrypted server location in Virginia. This is where the ClearPath Directive originated. It's also where we're now seeing unusual activity. Deletions, remote file burns, unlogged access. Karoline frowned. "Someone's erasing evidence." Reyes nodded grimly. "Someone inside the system is scared. Which means they know what you released is just the tip." Then came the real warning. "There's chatter," Kessler said. "Foreign actors are trying to seize on this moment. Russian and Iranian networks are pushing your interview like a rallying cry. They're painting you as a dissident hero of Christian nationalism." Karoline felt her stomach tighten. "That's not who I am." Reyes nodded slowly. "But that's how you're being used. Which means your next move has to be precise. No rallies, no leaks, no martyr speeches. If you push this the wrong way, you won't just burn bridges, you'll burn borders." Karoline stood. "I didn't start a war, I opened a curtain." Kessler's final words followed her as she left. "Be careful, Ms. Leavitt. When people pull curtains, sometimes what they find behind them destroys them." Back home that night, Karoline sat alone in her apartment. The lights were off. Her phone was buzzing every 10 seconds. Interviews, requests, threats, support. Then came a message she didn't expect. Private number. "You don't know the full story. You're not the first to try this. Meet me tomorrow, 4 p.m. Northeast Metro Station. Come alone. R." She stared at it for several minutes. She didn't recognize the number, but something about the signature, R, stuck with her. She checked the time. Midnight. Her hands were trembling. Now. In a city where the truth could be bent, hidden, or destroyed, someone else was trying to reach her. Someone who might know what the ClearPath documents really meant. And maybe what they were hiding. She leaned back in her chair, eyes staring at the ceiling. The war wasn't just on screens anymore. It had stepped into shadows. The air at Northeast Metro Station was cold, damp, and smelled faintly of oil and electricity. Karoline arrived 10 minutes early. Her security detail had protested her coming alone, but she insisted. If this R was who she thought it was, any surveillance would scare him off. The station was nearly empty. A train had just pulled away, leaving a trail of silence behind. Karoline sat on a rusted bench, eyes scanning every shadow. At exactly 4 p.m., a man in a faded military jacket appeared from the far tunnel. He walked with a limp, beard trimmed but uneven, sunglasses hiding most of his face. He carried no bag, no phone. He sat beside her without looking directly at her. "You look too calm for someone who's detonated half the internet," he said. Karoline didn't smile. "You're R?" He nodded once. "Name's Ronan Vale. Used to work NSA, Signal Intelligence Division." Her stomach dropped. That division was tied directly to the core of the documents she'd revealed. Project ClearPath, the same initiative exposed in her folder on The View. "You were part of it?" she asked quietly. "I helped write it," he said, voice almost bitter. "It started as a threat mitigation framework. Monitor radicalization online, foreign and domestic. After 2020, it shifted. More politics, less ethics." Karoline leaned forward. "You're saying it turned into a weapon?" Ronan looked at her finally. "Not a weapon, a scalpel. Quiet, surgical. You say the wrong thing, express the wrong faith, associate with the wrong voices. Your signal was choked. Views disappeared. Job offers ghosted. Credit scoring systems nudged downward. No fingerprints, just outcomes." Karoline's mind raced. "And the data I showed? Is it all true?" "It's real, but it's not complete. What you saw was the aftermath. What I kept is the mechanism." He pulled a flash drive from his coat and handed it to her. "That's the blueprint," he said. "Every bypass, every name, every backdoor agreement. Media companies, agencies, NGOs, even religious advisory panels. You've lit the match. That drive is the gasoline." Karoline hesitated. "Why me? Why now?" Ronan stood slowly, leaning on his cane. "Because you were the only one who said it live, on a national stage, and didn't blink. And because I don't have much time." Before she could ask, he was already walking away. Back in her apartment, Karoline didn't waste time. She inserted the flash drive into an isolated laptop. What unfolded on the screen was staggering. Dozens of folders, each labeled by quarter and year, each containing communications between senior agency staff and private platforms. Labels like Faith-Based Blacklist 22Q1, Persona Deprecation Engine, Invisible Strike List, Media Tier. One email thread caught her attention. It was a correspondence between a senior tech advisor and someone in the Department of Homeland Security. Karoline Leavitt, flagged for proactive signal dampening if she continues overt Christian rhetoric post-appointment. Align with previous directive on moral conservatism threat matrix. Karoline sat frozen. They hadn't just monitored her. They had prepared to erase her if she ever stepped out of line. She backed up the drive in 3 encrypted formats. Then she printed 2 documents, one for legal submission and another for media. But before she could decide her next step, her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown ID, voice only. "You have what they killed 4 careers to bury. the voice said. It was female, clipped, official. "Who is this?" Karoline asked. "I'm someone inside the agency. I saw what Ronan gave you. I'm telling you. You've just unlocked a code that links 3 separate international leaks. Russia's censorship protocol, China's faith-neutral AI testing, and now this. They've already started talking about you in closed sessions at the UN." Karoline's throat tightened. "Why are you warning me?" "Because the next move they make won't be political. It'll be personal. You've entered the phase where lives go missing." The line went dead. Outside her window, DC was calm. The monuments glowed, cars honked, children laughed, in the park. But inside Karoline's world, the silence grew louder. This wasn't just about one lawsuit anymore, or one TV show, or even one religion. It was about the systems behind the world's belief in freedom, and whether one voice could hold them accountable before they struck back in the dark. The next morning, the sky over Washington, D.C. was overcast, casting a gray shadow over the Capitol dome. Inside a nondescript federal building near Foggy Bottom, an emergency session had been convened. Closed doors, sealed phones, no press. At the center of the long mahogany table, Director Evelyn Harrow of the National Information Security Bureau. She was reviewing a printed document with a single stamped word on top, breach. "The flash drive was authentic," she said to the 12 people seated around her. "And it was leaked on live television. We have less than 48 hours before international inquiries begin." A defense official leaned forward. "Can we contain the source?" "Not without exposure," Harrow replied coldly. "She's too public now. Karoline Leavitt's face is everywhere. Half the country sees her as a whistleblower. The other half thinks she's a fanatic. Either way, she holds the narrative." Meanwhile, Karoline sat in a small soundproofed media studio just blocks from the White House. The lighting technician gave her the final signal. She was about to go live, not through any mainstream outlet, but a secure independent broadcast channel with international reach. The drive had been authenticated by 3 cybersecurity experts. Legal counsel had finally come around, stunned by what they saw. And now, she had one shot to do this right. 3, 2, 1. Karoline took a breath and began. "My name is Karoline Leavitt. I am the White House press secretary, and today I am speaking to you not on behalf of the administration, but as an American citizen and a Christian." The live stream audience counter surged, hundreds of thousands, then millions. For years, you have been told that censorship is random, that social media glitches, algorithm changes, and shadow bans are technical mistakes. But I have evidence, federal documents, that prove otherwise. She lifted the printed email, the one with her name flagged for signal dampening. "They tracked me. They tracked pastors, faith-based nonprofits, anyone who used biblical language to challenge approved narratives. That's not protection. That's persecution." The chat exploded. Viewers from Brazil, Poland, Nigeria, and rural America were lighting up the feed. Many of them had faced similar experiences. Posts disappeared, donations throttled, access revoked. "I've submitted this evidence to an international watchdog and to Congress. And to those in government listening now, I say this. I will not stop. You will not shame me into silence." Back at the emergency session, Harrow threw her folder down. "She's 4-star hand." A younger intelligence official looked nervous. "What do we do?" Harrow stared at the monitor where Karoline's broadcast continued, her voice clear and unwavering. "We change the strategy. If we can't control the narrative, we fracture it, we spin it, flood it, turn her into what we want the world to fear." Karoline finished the broadcast with a direct appeal. Truth is not a partisan idea. It's a moral one. And silence in the face of suppression is not neutrality. It's surrender. I won't surrender. She signed off. Her hands trembled slightly. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a private number with no ID. "Turn on CNN, now." She did. The anchor was already mid-sentence. And while some hail her as a hero, others are raising questions about her sudden rise and her links to extremist religious groups previously under federal watch. Images flashed of Karoline speaking at church events cropped to look militant. A grainy video from college, her quoting a Bible verse, was played over suspenseful music. Her heart dropped. The spin had begun. Seconds later, her email account locked her out. Her bank app froze. Her staff began calling, dozens of them, saying they were being asked if they stood by her or would resign. This wasn't just political anymore. It was personal, systemic, organized. Karoline sat back, her breathing shallow. They weren't going to kill her. Not yet. They were going to erase her, inch by inch. Faith first, then reputation, then livelihood. But they had made a mistake. They had undercut the very thing they feared most. A voice that refused to break. And now, the world was watching. The final move was coming. But it wouldn't be made in silence. Not this time. The city felt colder than usual. News helicopters buzzed overhead, circling like vultures. Outside the White House, a growing crowd had gathered. Protesters held signs, some in support of Karoline Leavitt, others accusing her of extremism and treason. The air crackled with tension. Inside a secure chamber beneath the West Wing, President McAdams sat with his National Security Council, visibly agitated. He tossed a printed article on the table. The headline read, "Leavitt Leaks Ignite Global Shock. Faith, Power, and Censorship at War." "She's becoming bigger than the office," the president muttered. "We underestimated her." CIA Director Patel leaned in. "Sir, if she testifies at the emergency hearing tomorrow, our internal communications with media execs could be subpoenaed. That opens doors we can't close again." The president rubbed his temples. She used faith to disarm the system, turned a media ambush into a moral battle. Then came the alert. Incoming feed. United Nations Security Council. Live. The screen lit up. At the podium stood Jean-Henri Deveau, the French ambassador. His voice rang through the room. "In light of recent disclosures by United States Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, we demand a multinational investigation into the abuse of surveillance and algorithmic suppression tied to religious and political identity." Silence fell over the war room. "This has gone international," whispered the president. Meanwhile, Karoline sat alone in a quiet chapel on Capitol Hill. Her phone was off. Her security detail had been pulled, officially for her safety, but she knew the truth. She was now politically radioactive. Across the room, a familiar figure stepped inside. Congresswoman Elena Pierce, a centrist Democrat known for her moral convictions. Pierce sat quietly beside Karoline, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did what no one else dared to do," she said softly. "You put light on what they tried to bury." Karoline's voice trembled. "I didn't want this to be about me." "It's not. That's why it matters." Pierce handed her a sealed envelope. "You'll testify tomorrow. Not as a spokesperson, not as a soldier in a culture war. As a citizen who saw the truth and refused to bow." The next day, Capitol Hill overflowed with media trucks and satellite feeds. Inside, the congressional hearing room was packed, with senators, journalists, diplomats, even former intelligence officials. Cameras rolled. Chairman Davenport banged his gavel. "We will now hear testimony from Karoline Leavitt." She stood, took the oath, and looked out at a sea of skeptics and believers. "My name is Karoline Leavitt," she began, her voice steady, "and I am here because I believe that truth should never be partisan. and faith should never be a threat. She laid out the timeline. The algorithms, the emails, the redacted memos. She showed how officials met with media heads under the guise of misinformation prevention. Yet the targets were disproportionately Christian, conservative, or simply dissenting. She ended with a line that would echo across nations. When belief becomes a liability, democracy becomes an illusion. The room was still. Even her harshest critics were quiet. That night on CNN, the headlines were mixed. Some anchors questioned the timing of the leak. Others openly admitted, this may be the most important testimony since Watergate. The View didn't air that week. Its network was under internal investigation. In Brazil, Poland, and parts of Africa, pro-faith protesters cited Karoline in marches for free speech. And in the U.S., for the first time in years, bipartisan senators co-sponsored a bill called the Faith Integrity Act, limiting algorithmic bias in federal contracts and mandating oversight. Karoline sat again in that chapel, candlelight flickering against the stained glass. Her phone lit up, a message from a blocked number. They'll come after you, again, but you already won, because you told the truth. A tear slid down her cheek, not from fear, but relief. Not everything had changed, but something had. A wall had cracked, and light was getting through.